LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Now listen. Full circle is defined as a series of developments that lead back to the original source, position, or situation. Every year we do it literally and metaphorically. We travel the same circular path around the sun. Well, it's more like an elliptical, like one giant cosmic astigmatism in the universe, but you get the point. Countless songs have been written about circles. Will the Circle Be Unbroken, famously recorded by Maybelle Carter, or Circles, written and recorded by the Captain and Tennille, who also recorded that pop classic Muskrat Love, a softcore porn song about two rodents named Susie and Sam going at it. Several Christmases ago, my brother got everybody in our family a subscription to Ancestry.com. I figured you did a quick little swab of something and called it a day, but no, they gave you this tube. No, it was like a Pyrex dish you'd bring to a potluck, and you had to fill it to the rim with your spit. It was just disgusting. You mailed your half-gallon sample off to Salt Lake City, and a month later, you got your results back. After all that, I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed. Both my mom and dad had done the DNA test, and they were indeed my mom and dad. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe some distant connection to royalty, or at least somebody who owned a house on the beach. A friend of mine discovered through a different DNA service that he has a gaggle of children from his college days when he was poor and donated sperm to make ends meet. One by one, these full-grown kids keep reaching out to him. At last count, he has 8 kids who have contacted him through the website, in addition to the 2 full-grown boys he sired with his wife. Eventually, holidays at his house will be like an Osmond family reunion. No, my relatives were boring. They were immigrants from multiple continents that somehow managed to cross-pollinate and eventually produce, well, me. I'm like a genetically mixed mutt from the pound. When I was growing up, I had the good fortune to know both my grandmothers. And the really great thing was, they couldn't have been more different if they tried. Yet both of them were amazingly resilient and strong women who made quite an impact on me. My mom's mom was a tough but loving Irish woman with a penchant for saying bless your heart and for pulling off the floor sweeper during dinner when we visited as kids. I guess I couldn't blame her. She had both leaves in the dining room table, and jammed around it were 3 sets of adults, 6 grandchildren, and her elderly mother-in-law, all wolfing down our Reuben sandwiches and littering her dining room floor with chunks of sauerkraut, crumbs of rye bread, and homemade molasses cookies. It was like one of those Henry VIII medieval banquets you see in the movies. I'm sure Grandma May slept for days once we all left. My dad's mom came from a large Catholic family in South Dakota. Her real name was Edna, but everybody in their family had a real name and then a fake name, which I never understood. Adair Bradford was Boomer, Robert was Newt, and my grandma, Edna, was called Joe. Go figure, but that's how I knew her. Grandma Joe and I had an interesting journey together for which I will always be grateful. Grandma Joe was born in 1915. She met my grandfather, Alred, or AJ, for whom I am initialed, and they hit it off. Alred was really tall, had a great full head of hair, and those photos of them courting are fantastic, as they were both snappy dressers and loved to go out dancing. The big entertainment in small towns back then were bands that toured from town to town. Alred and Joe danced to them all. Benny Goodman, Tommy Tucker, and even Lawrence Welk was out honing his accordion skills. Good times. They married in 1937, had 2 kids, my dad and his sister, and settled in Sioux City, Iowa. Grandma Joe's next chapter of her life was all set. So she thought. My dad was only 6 years old when they discovered his dad had colon cancer. They didn't have Cologuard back then. Nope. Once they found it, there wasn't much to do except cobalt radiation treatments and hope for the best. Poor Grandpa Alred deteriorated for 7 months, and during that entire time, my Grandma Joe stayed with him at the hospital, sleeping on a cot. My dad and his sister went to stay with their grandparents. Back then, kids under 16 weren't allowed in the hospital, but on October 31st, 1948, my dad remembers being snuck into the hospital with his sister where they had a party in his dad's room with orange soda. A week later, on November 7th, Grandpa Alred died, leaving Grandma Jo a widow at age 33 with 2 young kids. As part of getting through this thing we call life, we have difficult and unfortunate events that take place in our lives over which we have no control. They hit us hard, and we have to deal with them. I do know some folks who seem unable to move on from those life-changing events. It's like their lives ended when it happened and they get stuck. My Grandma Jo was not one of those people. She had 2 kids to support. She picked herself up by the bootstraps and started the next chapter of her life with aplomb. She got a job as the receptionist at Channel 9, where she would stay for 13 years. Now, this was early TV, and there was a kiddie show called Canyon Kid, which was shot live daily. The Channel 9 lobby would be filled with dozens of kids and their parents, all being wrangled by my Grandma Jo. And on Tuesdays, it was even more fun because it was Pet Day. And joining the kids and parents was a menagerie of all kinds of animals, pooping and peeing all over Grandma's lobby. Talk about a hostile work environment. Channel 9 had this thing called a weather ball, which sat on top of the Badgero building in downtown Sioux City. The weather ball would turn different colors depending on the weather forecast. One of Grandma's job duties was to program the weather ball, then go outside and walk down to the end of the street so she could see it and make sure it was the right color. A catchy jingle was used to tell people what each color signified. Weather ball white as snow, down the temperature will go. Weather ball red as fire, temperature is going higher. And, of course, this being Iowa, where Iowans complaining about their weather is a statewide pastime, some snarky person would inevitably call into the station. Grandma Jo would answer, "Good afternoon, Channel 9," and they would do their own version. Weather ball green as grass, you can shove it up your... As well as doing her job and raising her kids, Grandma Jo and her good friend Ella, a production assistant at Channel 9, would cross the Missouri River to South Sioux City, Nebraska some nights after work, most likely after Canyon Kid's Pet Day, and have cocktails at the Dublin House. Now, the drinks were cheaper in Nebraska, but they would get hit on by these drunk Nebraska farmers, and to keep them at bay, Joe and Ella concocted the story that they were in town visiting from Pretoria, South Africa, where their father was a missionary and where they canned bananas for a living. When my dad was in high school and had his high school buddies over to the house, Grandma Jo did the public service, sitting them all down and told them about the birds and the bees. This information obviously came in handy later when my dad was in college and was dating my mom. You remember that other grandmother of mine, the Irish woman? Her Swedish husband, my Grandpa Lloyd, worked downtown, and one afternoon, during my mom and dad's courtship, Grandpa happened to see my mother getting on a city bus when she should have been at work. He called Grandma May and told her what he had seen. Now, my mom had gone to Augustana Lutheran Church with her folks the weekend before, but had to leave prior to communion because she was feeling sick and had to throw up. Well, Grandma May put 2 and 2 together and came to the conclusion that my mother was not at work that day because she was with child. Now, this sort of thing happens all the time and has been a plot point in stories since forever. Oops, somebody just got knocked up. The story has to go in a different direction. It happens. In fact, one of my favorite old family pictures is from August 29th, 1901. It is of my Grandma May's parents on their wedding day. In the photo stands a very dashing 26-year-old Tom Manley, a first-generation Irish immigrant, and his lovely, seated 18-year-old wife, Lydia Petty, a first-generation immigrant from England. And guess what? She's pregnant. A little over 7 months later, Ethel was born, weighing in at a whopping 10 pounds, 2 ounces. Wait, no, sorry, that was me. But Ethel was a full-grown baby when she was born. Apparently, Tom and Lydia told their rural Nebraska neighbors that Ethel was premature, and I guess they bought it. Kind of like they bought the canning bananas story decades later. But on that fateful Sioux City day in 1962, when my very own Jessica Fletcher, a.k.a. Grandma May, figured it all out, she told Grandpa Lloyd to hightail it home. They showed up at my mom's apartment to find out what the deal was, and, yep, Grandma May had nailed it. My mom had thought she had the flu and had been to the doctor that day, but was told by the doctor, that's no flu, dear. You are pregnant. And it was with me. Yay! My father was out working his college summer job, sewer construction, that day, and had no idea this was all going on. Grandpa Lloyd and Grandma May told my mom they were coming back that night and they wanted my dad there. That night, my mom and her folks, my dad and his mom, my Grandma Jo, and, well, frankly, me, though I was womb-bound, all met at my mother's apartment for a reckoning. My Grandpa Lloyd was livid. Major drama ensued, and my Grandma Jo had to step up and take control. I consider this the first step in a full-circle journey that I had with my Grandma Jo that lasted for the next 42 years. A new chapter was beginning for all of us. But first, Grandma Jo had to stop my Grandpa Lloyd from killing his own daughter and soon-to-be son-in-law. LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Be continued.